Tribbie is a pretty insane AoE support, no clickbait intended, and in this video I will be showing you how to properly build her and the teams and even stuff like her Eidolons. Let's start with her trace priority. Since I've already covered her kit in my previous video. You want to level pretty much everything but her basic attack, which has lower priority. Even her trace stats and bonus abilities are all extremely useful. Now before we get into builds and stuff, let's talk about a fast or slow Tribbie. The dilemma between a fast or a slow Tribbie is that Tribbie doesn't really benefit from taking extra turns. It's usually just an extra basic attack and she gets her energy slightly faster, but at the same time, since her buffs tick down on her own turns, you are also technically increasing her SP usage by decreasing her buff duration. However, when you take into account that Tribbie loves playing against many enemies since it regenerates more energy for her in a shorter period of time, the extra energy you get from a faster turn will almost never outweigh the energy she gets from her allies hitting enemies, which is why in most cases, even a slow Tribbie is already very good. I was able to get 3 ultimates in a 0th cycle, so a short period of time even with a slow dance build. So just imagine if your clears are maybe 2, 4 or higher cycles, the number of ultimates Tribbie will be able to get. Not to mention that going from a fast to slow Tribbie also loses you more than half of her own damage, which is really not what you want when Tribbie can genuinely contribute a decent chunk to the team's total damage. Therefore, a fast Tribbie, in my opinion, is only really good if 2 conditions are fulfilled. 1, you already have a ton of damage from the rest of your team, and you don't really need Tribbie's additional damage, like you have an E2 or maybe even E6 DPS or something like that. Number 2, Tribbie doesn't really regenerate energy as fast. This means like a lower target scenario, or your DPS is a lower target as well. The thing is, at this point it is probably better to just run a different team altogether. Tribbie wants to deal with heavy AoE scenarios, and I recommend you to use her for such scenarios. Perhaps it could be better in the future with a different kind of setup, and we can revisit this idea then. But right now I think it's really unnecessary, especially when Tribbie already regenerates enough energy, and in Memory of Chaos, certain enemies only summon extra enemies on their own turn. So if you're way too fast, your team would actually just be hitting a single enemy, which kind of defeats the purpose of the extra advance. Now with that out of the way, let's continue with the more straightforward Litecoin choices, since this determines your relic choices. Firstly, we have her S1, If Time Were a Flower. This gives Tribbie extra crit damage and a ton of free energy when entering the battle or when using her follow-up attack. On top of extra energy, her follow-up will also grant your team an additional 48% crit damage, which is pretty nice but not really all that crazy. Dance. This Litecoin is actually absolutely disgusting with Tribbie, and contrary to what some other guides have been saying, you do not need to play a high-speed Tribbie to use this Litecoin. As long as there are sufficient enemies, which is not as much as you would think, this Litecoin will be really strong on Tribbie regardless of her speed. It is to the point where sometimes this Litecoin can outperform her S1 if you set it up properly, but it already completely outperforms S1 in pure fiction. Next we have Meshing Cogs S5. This is a 3-star Litecoin that gives extra energy after being hit or hitting enemies once per turn. The problem with this is that it's locked to once per turn, and Tribbie is usually played pretty slow with Poet, so really it's just a way worse S1 since S1 can regenerate energy outside of her own turns. From here we have stuff like Planetary Rendezvous and Poised to Bloom. Planetary is more so for a possible future quantum DPS provided she is good with Tribbie, and Poised to Bloom is kind of a budget S1 just like Meshing Cogs, but since Meshing Cogs is a 3-star Litecoin, I think it's going to be quite rare you consider using this Litecoin. Now for relic builds, it's almost always going to be crit body, usually crit damage, HP boots, HP spear, and either HP or ERR rope. HP over damage up because Tribbie can already get up to 216% damage boost for herself, so extra HP will yield more damage. HP or energy rope depends on your choice of Litecoins. If you have S1, you can opt to use a HP rope for even more damage, since it already gives you so much energy. But even then, ERR rope is not a bad choice, it's still pretty good, because the energy effects from this Litecoin is affected by ERR. Again, it would be great if Hoyoverse could maybe mention this somewhere on the description. For every other Litecoin though, it should usually be energy rope. For substats, it's just HP and crit rate or damage, depending on which you need more of. Effective resistance can also be quite useful because Tribbie is, again, usually played slow. So if she tanks like an imprisoned CC or something like that, it's actually going to take like 5 years before it's her turn again. Now for the reason why I say usually a crit damage for her body is because of her relic sets. So let's take a look at that. Poet of Morning Collapse gives Tribbie quantum damage and 32% crit rate at the cost of 8% speed. This decreases Tribbie's SP usage, since she does not need to take turns to regenerate energy, and can technically extend the duration of one use of a skill or ultimate, giving the rest of your team extra time to regenerate more energy for Tribbie. If for some reason you are playing a higher speed Tribbie, Eagle is another 4-piece choice. Other than that, transitional pieces like Longevous Disciple and Genius of Breeding Stars are all pretty okay choices. For planar ornaments, Bone Collection, which is the new relic introduced in 3.1, is Tribbie's best choice in terms of damage. She doesn't really need another 5% ERR. I found the difference to boil down to literally just hitting 2 extra enemies, and even then this does not account for external energy sources like being hit, defeating enemies or wall armor, so it's not really needed, whereas the damage Tribbie loses for running ERR is about 8 to 12% depending on your light cone, which is why I recommend Bone Collection as a general planar ornament instead, since Tribbie can, again, contribute a pretty good chunk of damage to your team. Hence, for stat goals, it's usually about 5000 HP without S1 and about 6500 HP with S1 and HP roll. Whereas for crit stats, you can usually subtract 32 from your total crit rate, and your crit damage should be about 220 plus, since you already have so much crit rate, and you can focus more on crit damage substats. Now for Eidolons, Tribbie has pretty good vertical investment, especially her very hyped up E1. Whenever an ally attacks, it gives you an additional 24% true damage of the total attack to the enemy that was dealt additional damage while her ultimate is active. So if you use a huge nuke like the Herta's enhanced skill or Acheron's ultimate, this will actually just give you 100 to 300,000 extra damage for free. That's quite ridiculous. And that is why it increases Tribbie's damage by more than twice if you count that additional true damage as Tribbie's own damage. However, do note that it's a bit awkward with units like the Herta, especially for summoned units, because sometimes the Herta one-shots the wave before her enhanced skill, because her ultimate already does a lot of damage, which technically gives a lower damage increase for Tribbie's E1, since the Herta's nuke only hits 3 or even a single enemy at times. E2 is an independent multiplier, and this time it's more obvious because of the phrasing. It is 120% of the original damage dealt by the additional damage. It also adds an extra instance of additional damage each time that it is triggered. This is, however, quite average, since it only gives you a few more procs of additional damage, and a 1.2 multiplier is so-so when the base damage is quite low. E4 allows all allies to ignore 18% defense, pretty classic Eidolon, but also a pretty average one since not a lot of the teams have inbuilt defense reduction. E6 increases the damage of her follow-up attacks by 729%, basically making her deal as much damage as an E0 DPS on average. So anyways, when it comes to E1 versus S1, E1 is an absolutely insane damage boost, and since Tribbie has a really good alternative in Dance, it's pretty much always E1 over S1. It also doesn't really help S1 that units like Yunli and the Herta have massive inbuilt crit damage buffs, which further diminishes the value of S1. Like I said in my previous Tribbie video, even though she is slightly restricted to AoE units, her buffs are versatile enough for her to be used in pretty much every team that uses AoE attacks. The only issue we might run into for such teams is that there might already be better options for those teams that you might have. This would be units like Iglea, Acheron, and Firefly. Iglea can technically proc 6 additional hits with a single joint attack, but she already has much better supports like Sunday, Robin, and Remembrance Trailblazer. Acheron at E0 requires 2 Nihility units unless you want to drop your sustain slot, which is why it's much more viable and easier to slot Tribbie in at E2 Acheron. Firefly is kind of the same as Acheron. She wants at least Runway, Harmony MC, or Fugue, which is 2 slots taken up, and you can even run Harmony MC plus Fugue, which means all 3 slots are used up. On the other hand, units like the Herta, Argenti, Yunli, Jade, Small Herta, Himeko, and Serval make extremely good use of Tribbie, especially the units with automatic follow-ups like Yunli, Jade, Small Herta, and Himeko. Whereas for the Herta, even though she doesn't have any automatic follow-ups, the extra energy Tribbie can regenerate for her through her follow-ups and ultimates directly boost the Herta's ultimate uptime, which is exactly what her kit wants. Tribbie's absolute best in slot is someone who scales off HP and has frequent AoE attacks. This character technically doesn't exist yet other than E1 Mide, I don't know how to pronounce that, and even then he requires Godslayer, but I wouldn't be surprised if there are other future units like that. That's pretty much it for my Tribbie guide. Just a reminder that I do have a Discord server if you'd like to join, where we talk about Star Wars stuff and so on. Anyways, good luck for your pulls in about a week's time, and thanks for watching.